Welcome to the Real Situation podcast with Jason Campbell. I am thrilled to introduce my guest this morning, Nik Pollina. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I feel like we've been trying to do this for a few days, but I'm glad we were actually able to do it because I've been wanting to chat.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to this because usually we'll see each other at some shows. We do some vintage shows together. So that's where, let's say, our relationship, the relationship that we have, that's where that's born from.
Totally.
However, what I'm most interested in, Nick, is your online profile. When I see you online and all the entrepreneurship and all the business development, all the things that define your online identity, I'm now like, wait a minute. This woman is making some serious moves, and I want
Thank
to
you.
hear more about it. But let me slow my roll. Let me slow my roll a little bit. Let's give the audience a little bit of background on you first, Nick, before we dive into this. Before we dive into this conversation. Okay.
Perfect.
Nik Pollina is a New York-based entrepreneur, digital marketing strategist, and one of the vintage fashion space's most compelling voices. She is founder of Seven Moods, a vintage brand built around size-inclusive, sustainable pieces released through monthly mood drops. It's a model that has turned casual shoppers into a loyal, style-driven community. Alongside Seven Mood, Nick runs Polina Digital, a marketing agency helping brands sharpen their online presence through data driven strategy and creative campaigns. Her ability to move fluidly between aesthetics and analytics sets her apart. And as the vintage resale market continues its rapid growth, Nick Polina sits at an interesting intersection of entrepreneurship, marketer, and tastemaker, someone who understands both the culture and the commerce of what she is building.
That is
So
so
that
nice. Thank you. That is really nice. And I am thankful for you putting that all together.
Well, I see, while I don't know the full story, that's why we're having this conversation. I just see such dynamism in your presentation, in your information, and your whole profile. So I want to drill down on that and get a sense of like how you arrived here. So first
Yeah.
of all, Nick, tell us, how did you arrive into this vintage space? Was it passion? Was it opportunity? Was it both? Was it a pivot? How did you arrive here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit of both. So my story is kind of like I feel somewhat of like the modern entrepreneurship story where you go into corporate and you are super excited about the corporate world, and then over time you just kind of stop having as much excitement or growth potential. And I feel like slowly but surely I just lost my interest in it. And I was actually considering just leaving my job at which I was working at Google in as a user researcher, and just starting my own thing because I had somewhat accidentally created a career consulting business off of my social media presence at the time, helping women get into like STEM fields. And then what I believe is the universe, I got laid off because I was just like kind of going back and forth on it so much. So I was definitely looking for some sort of opportunity to start a business, and I just didn't know exactly what it was going to be. Um, so I just started talking about things that I enjoyed, which already was just like shopping in New York City and especially shopping at vintage stores. So going to different vintage shops in the city, highlighting these new and up and coming stores that I felt like was a really interesting space in New York that not a lot of people had yet really been touching. Even though it was only 3 years ago, it definitely was a different vibe. Like people had not yet like really mainstream clung on to vintage as they are now. So yeah, and I think through that I've just kind of it felt like a natural progression. Like I've gotten an opportunity to have a rack at Regeneration, which is like, Artists and Please collective that they have in Brooklyn. And
Yes.
then really enjoyed that and ended up opening a studio space with my friend Sienna for a few years. We sold more like curated thrift. And then the past year, that's when I really got into Seven Moods, which is more like my designer vintage stuff. So, yeah,
Oh,
I don't know. It's like opportunity, timing, I was looking for like some sort of business to start, as well as it just was my interest and my passion and what I wanted to talk about. So I feel like that's why it's worked so well because it was like a combination of all of the things at once.
See, and that it's fascinating having that born out of having firstly, as an entrepreneur, you've had many steps in just that beginning stage. In the
Right, right.
beginning stages, you had so many different iterations, which is so entrepreneurial for those entrepreneurs out there. That's a point to actually to definitely note right there. But then how did then that transform into an online business? Fine, you did your recon, you went around, the stores in New York and gave that information to an audience, but then where did the trigger take place for you to actually start the business and start it online?
Yeah, I think that, like I said, I kind of saw like the trajectory of how to like build an online presence and then convert those people who follow you into customers based on what you were already talking about. So I think it was first establishing credibility online and getting this community of people who trust in me in the like vintage space, but particularly in the New York vintage space, hopefully. Um, then I think when I got that opportunity at Regeneration to have a rack, they told me that that weekend I sold more than anyone in the store the first weekend that I opened. And it just kind of clicked for me in that moment that like my followers who were engaging with my content and enjoying the videos of where to go shopping in New York City were also people who were looking for a certain type of product and trusted me to be able to provide that product to them. So that's really where I was like, okay, this is going to be a business, not just something that is like my online persona. So that's really where I started putting some
Ooh.
of the systems in place to create a website or to, start sourcing on a more of a larger scale. And I think that has just kind of compounded on each other. So like everything I do in the business, I find that I like come back and tell my followers about it. They're very engaged in my journey because I really was starting from nothing. And that's been like the most fun part to me is like seeing people who have been there from the start being like, no, I literally watched you get laid off from Google and build this business. Like, this is so crazy. So I think any entrepreneur who's like listening to this, I just feel like I always encourage people to build in public. It is a little scary because in some ways you always feel like you're like hyping yourself up before it happens, right? Because you're like, this is like not really where it should be, but I need to talk about it and I need to promote it. Um, but I just think the community aspect is so important nowadays
But
that
I think that's exactly what's setting you apart. And in your delivery right there, you spoke about the followers so much, and it's clear how important that community is to you. So you recognize
really,
from jump that the followers was integral to you didn't take them for granted. You recognized from jump that the followers was the magic sauce, let's say, the key ingredient in all of this.
yeah, I totally think that's true. I think I'm, like I said, I was also a user researcher. So I feel like I really
Mm,
understood, or maybe, you know what, I maybe use the data from my social media as like signal. So I'd be like, oh, people seem to be really gravitating towards these types of stores on my page. Like maybe that's the type of products that they're also looking for. Maybe I should source more of those types of items. So I think like I always saw it as a two-way street where I'm taking their feedback on a day-to-day basis, whether that's like through likes, comments, etc., or
yes.
actual conversations with them in person. So yeah, and I feel like I am a part of my community and that's what I like love about it. It doesn't feel so like isolating sometimes as being an entrepreneur can. So yeah, I think it just has always made sense to be like serving that community and making sure that I'm providing what they're looking for.
Well, I find that fascinating because, my dear, you know, we share a community. We know a lot of
Right.
vintage purveyors, but most of us are not data driven like you are. Most of us, this is all very, this is all very emotional. This is all very, I love this. Let's buy this and go sell it. It's not rooted in any real strategy. Yes, I mean, obviously, we know a lot of people who do wonderful business in vintage, but not many people speak in this way with as I said, a data driven perspective. And also the other detail that I find fascinating about your profile is you said you build in public. I think that's also quite stark, because in many ways you're like, I'm not gatekeeping anything. I'm showing
Yeah.
you how I build my business, and I'm also giving you the tools to build yours. But why so much disclosure?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think those 2 points are very counter to what had historically been happening in the vintage space. So, first, I have to say, like, I do think I'm very data driven, but one thing I am trying to lean into is people in the vintage community have inspired me so much to be a little bit more like intuitive and creative. And I feel like while people, maybe are listening to podcasts on business people who build businesses and are data driven and all these things, I'm really leaning into this year, at least, like listening to people who are really creative, didn't base anything off of data, because so in some ways I'm like, I almost need to get out of that. Like, I need to be a little bit more free flowing. So I feel like,
It seems to be serving you.
yeah. Well, yeah, but like sometimes you're just like, I don't know. Like, I feel like it's all like a self-discovery process, but like I feel like I'm like sometimes I'm too data driven, whatever. But yeah, I think it's a new thing in the vintage space. Like, I do feel like people are really so creative, and I think, I want to encourage more vintage sellers to think that way and think a little bit more data driven, because I feel like, especially as like the masses are starting to be more aware of vintage, it's like a little bit easier to get data on what they're looking for and what they like. The second thing, why am I so open? I don't know. I mean, I think that like I said, had a career consulting business prior to being, a vintage seller. So I felt that I lost a little bit of that like teaching educator lens that I had when I started the business. And I was so hyper focused on like my business and growing me and whatever, that I wanted to, now that I feel like I've established some level of credibility, to come back and like pay it forward and be like, no, you can do this too. And like, here's the ways that I've thought about it. And also, again, it kind of comes from like the comments and the DMs that I get. Like, so many people are asking me, how did you do this? Like, what do your margins look like? All those types of things. Like, those are the questions that I'm getting. And so I just want to, again, like, it goes back to serving the community. So it just is like, how can, again, I give those pieces of information and tidbits? But yeah, it's definitely counterintuitive to what I feel used to go on in the vintage space, where it was a little bit more like hush hush and a little bit more I don't know, like exclusive. You know what I
And
mean?
I dare say you have a bit of a girl boss kind of profile, in that not just for yourself. Clearly, you are one, but you communicate the message of empowering women out there. I feel that you're very sort of women centric, and that your messaging is about empowering women for them to do their own business. They can go sourcing in Japan and Milan or wherever, all the places that you go sourcing. They too can buy from these vintage stores and these wholesale places. I feel it's a very empowering message for an audience of young women, let's say.
Yeah, I think because I'm almost like speaking to my past self. Like, I feel like I worked in
Ah.
corporate for so long, like I said, and I had these dreams of always being like in fashion and doing my own business, but fear, I would assume, and just like, trying to fit in the correct path or whatever it is, that stopped me from actually taking the leap. And it was, you know, getting confronted with a layoff that forced me into this path. So if I didn't have that moment happen to me, like, would I be doing any of this? So that's why I like to try to be like, no, you can do it too. Because if you don't have that single moment where you have a rejection or you're confronted with this reality, Or if you don't have someone cheering you on, you might never like enter these spaces that you're like always been so excited to be a part of. And I feel like that's like my I'm also an older sister. I don't know. I feel like I always just like love giving advice and making people feel good about themselves and motivating them to do the things that they want to do. So
Well, strategically, or it's just a part of your personality. I think that it has been part of the generating of business in your
it
in
also
your
helps with
world.
that. So like it's also a good thing to, make. I think that's those types of content always perform well too when it's like, oh, I feel motivated and I feel inspired after, you know?
Absolutely, and also there's an honesty. There feels like an honest delivery and an honesty of information and so forth, and that's always appreciated. And it doesn't seem like you are afraid to to show behind the scenes, warts and all.
Yeah. I totally. I feel like I like don't I think I don't always have the most like aesthetic of everything. Like I feel like you can see my website and like the pictures aren't perfect or whatever, or I show the back of my studio and it's like full of boxes or whatever it is. But I just, yeah, I like being authentic about it. And I just think it's as much as we want to always put on like a glamorous front, of course, and an aesthetic front, it's not that aesthetic of a job really at the
Oh,
end of
please, it's a slog. We know it's a slog.
like
But let's
but like I feel like we've created this world where it's like the vintage is like a fabulous space, and I'm like nothing about our job is fabulous other than like maybe buying the clothes.
that part.
Yeah.
And actually that's a wonderful segue into my next line of questioning. But let's talk about the creative part. Let's talk about the sourcing. How do you go about that? How is this instinctive? Do you have like some sort of formula in that arena as well? Or this is coming from a different place in your arsenal?
When I started, I was sourcing items. Like I said, I was doing more curated thrift, so things were a little bit more, like under $50 range type of thing. And I wanted to provide something that like I personally couldn't find, which was like cool Y2K type vintage that wasn't super expensive. So I feel like that was really, I was going off of like what I was looking for in the marketplace. Um, that I really wasn't finding in New York at the time. And I feel like now there's more spaces like that, but I felt like but when I started, not so much. Um, I think it's a combination. So it really is a combination of what I like. It always has to go back to what I like because it just wouldn't feel authentic if I'm like picking things that I don't find cute. Um, but also I do learn from like what sells quickly, what people are DMing about. As I've always mentioned, like I am data driven. So also returning to some of those commonly sold pieces that feel like it's really easy to just like move inventory on. I don't know. Like what do you kind of how do you think about it? Is it just like full intuition or do you kind of
Well, for me, I have to say it's been evolutionary, like it has been for you. Initially, I used to buy solely what I thought was cool, irrespective of labels and all the things. I used to just buy what I thought was cool. But
yeah,
then, of course, the audience decide. I'm not here for me. I know what's cool. I have a massive wardrobe. I have all the things that I need, but the
right.
audience decides. And and I'm not about knocking up against a wall. No, the audience say they want designer bags and they want the Gucci's and the Pradas and all the things, yes, I will continue to provide that for them. So yes, the audience decides for me, and I continue to augment and change my programming as they also shift with their needs and their demands. Absolutely, absolutely. That's how it works. And also, funny enough, you said that you started at a lower price point, as I did. I've been forced to increase my offering and price point because the audience wants it. I didn't know that they
I
would be
agree.
buying $3,000 things,
I
at
agree.
a pop-up. No?
Yeah. No, I think that's really I wanted to ask you about that too. Like, do you feel like people are really starting to gravitate more to like designer, label, brand, all that type of stuff lately? Because you've been in it for a long time, so you kind of have seen the trajectory of like how things have been going. And yeah, I think that's very interesting. I've like heard, certain entrepreneurs say like there's like a saying or whatever where it's like you're begging a customer to buy a $30 thing, but then you're just like the person who's buying the $3,000 thing is like, yeah, I'll send over the money now. And I've actually found
Oh,
that to really be true. I'm like, something, it's a weird, I personally don't think I'm like that, but I find that the customer kind of is. It's an interesting thing. Have you found that similar?
funny enough, I've never heard that, but
Yeah.
I have 100% found that. That's actually quite funny. Yeah, that's truth. That's absolute truth. And that's a fascinating development. I've been doing a lot of shows. I just came back from Miami doing a show there. Fascinated by how committed, and by the way, this is like the traditional audience that we be going shopping at Bergdorf's and Barney's and all the things. This is
They're
that
now coming.
same audience that is so excited about shopping vintage. And I think to your point, the learning curve has been it's been a short learning curve because everything is changing so rapidly. It's changing literally overnight. So yes, I've been experiencing the same thing. So that's fascinating.
Yeah. Miami was good, right? Wasn't it? Like I went to Miami for a pop-up and I felt like there was just such good energy about vintage. And I was excited to see outside of New York, like people starting, I mean, Miami is like kind of a New York in a lot of ways, but like, you know what I mean? Like I think it's exciting to see it grow outside of New York too.
Oh, 100%. Oh, no. And we're going to get a bit more into the developments in the lane, but Nick, I think it's just so explosive. And that's why I want to speak to individuals like yourself who are in on the front lines of vintage because I am trying to understand myself how it is going to evolve and what place it'll have in the culture as it continues to evolve. But it seems at this moment unabated. So
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the evolution of all of this. Now, tell me about your the selling component. Are you selling directly from all of this content that you put out on Instagram and whatever other platforms that you choose to prioritize? I'm fascinated by the social media translation into sales.
Mhm. Yeah, I explored a lot of different channels last year with the vintage bag. So I did like the whatnot, I did like TikTok live, I did like social media selling and could, driving people to my website from that. I did the markets, I did my own pop-ups. And actually, at the end of the year, I was looking at how everything panned out and I was expecting, the online to be the best, but what I found was actually in person is like really crushes it. Like I think people with vintage like to see it in person, especially with a pricier item, and they want to be able to make that decision in their call on like what is the quality instead of me being like, the quality is excellent with small, like whatever on the website in the description, you do the best you can, but it's I think easier for people to make a call on if they would find that item to be up to their quality standards
Right.
to make that purchase. So I think it's like a combo where if we're not in person, we're doing social media drops and those do well and they kind of like sustain us in between those markets and pop-ups. But yeah, I think the markets are great. The solo pop-ups for me has probably been the best. And I think that's because it kind of combines the two of social media bringing people to a free event. Um, and then it's kind of just me there. So it's almost like a really massive drop that we're just like
I
alone.
gotta say, the post that you had about your event in Miami with, like you said, 900 people, and I saw the queues, 900 people to show up to a solo pop-up event. I mean, that's quite a feat. That's tremendous. Like, I mean, that's a real business.
No, I was really shocked, honestly. I was doing it in part because I was going to stay with my mom who lives in Florida. And I was like, you know what? Like, why don't I just bring some bags, see how it goes? And I was genuinely like, if 100 people show up, that will be great. Like, it'll just be like a brand awareness thing. You know what I mean? And then a couple of videos just ended up doing really well. And we asked two local sellers to attend, and their videos also did well. And I think Miami is a little starved for it. Like New York almost is like you got to pick between what one you want to go to that weekend. And so that was what was exciting to me to see is like, oh, like other cities are ready for this vintage kind of wave. And we shouldn't be like afraid to go to these other cities and kind of, bring our pieces and do the same things that we're doing in New York. So that really excited me to have that Miami pop up.
That's major. Okay. And this is the opportunity now to talk about scale because what I surmise, at least from your delivery, at least from the content that you produce, is that you see scale in this business, not just for your own effort, but also for an industry as a whole. But traditionally, us vintage purveyors have been scrappy independents, operating, through a labor of love and having they trust. I know many of families who put their children through universities, build homes, live a wonderful life in vintage through
Yeah.
vintage. But is vintage scalable to the extent that it may take, let's say, market shares away from the department stores, the few that are remaining? Does it have space? I'm interested in a larger business model, but is that opportunity really there for a larger business plan? Can it be a multi-billion dollar business? Is that where we're headed? What's your forecast on what the potential of this marketplace is?
I mean, it's a really good question because it's not a super scalable like thing to do, right? Like everything's one of one. So you can't take one picture. Like if I manufactured a bag, I could take one picture one time of the bag and sell 10,000 pieces. To go back to like why I like in person a little bit is there's a few less steps required to move inventory. Whereas online, it's definitely like I don't know, like you have to take the photos, you have to make sure the descriptions are good, all of those things. So it does require like an extra layer of support, whether that's you or an employer or whatever it is.
Right.
But like, yeah, I mean, why not? Like, I think they said that like the industry as a whole, I definitely think I see scale as an industry because it's like they said that pre-owned luxury is going to outpace new luxury next year, I think, in 2027, which
But
is
but
insane.
but those numbers, well, those numbers just must be astronomical. Then there must be some
Right.
real numbers. I haven't seen any of those reports, so I can't weigh in. But really, that's tremendous.
I know. And so I don't see why not. And I think there's so many people that are doing really cool things now. Like, do you know Anna who owned Club Vintage? Have you ever
I
met
do
her?
not.
She's
No.
starting a thing called Recon, which is like a secondhand or resale convention. And I was looking at the people who she had. I can't go. It's actually this week, but um she has like the CEO of ThreadUp, this like CBO of Vestiaire Collective going like all of these people from eBay and Vestiaire and ThreadUp. And she's like, why didn't this exist? Like, this is an industry that doesn't deserve like a side note at like a fashion or like a retail convention. Like, it really is becoming its own industry. And so that's like almost what I'm thinking too. Like, how could we, at Seven Moods, I'm always looking to like evolve things. And so I'm like, how can I provide more like the infrastructure too to like support people? And I think that goes back to why I'm like giving free information, stuff like that. It's like it's never bad to be the source of information and
And
infrastructure in a growing,
it's
industry, which I feel like you could like crush because you just have so much intel and you know what I mean? So that's the way I think
well,
about it.
well, part of having these conversations is part of that.
Right. Yeah.
I'm so fascinated, and I don't understand some things, and so I want to talk to the community, especially those who are really making moves. Yes, I have a serial entrepreneurial history, but I am not as active. Let's say certainly like someone like yourself, and particularly committed to the education. I'm not as active like someone like yourself. But to that point that you just mentioned about scale. You had a massive jump from one year to the next. Like I think you mentioned that you even went into the million mark of revenues or of sales. Like, how did that jump take place in one year? What did you do? Was that strategy? Was that just like grinding to the hilt? How did you achieve that?
I think um one, it was through conversations that I had with other vintage sellers that were like, yeah, I also started off selling the $30 shirt. It's never gonna be the thing. Like you should go more expensive. And a lot of people who I consider like my mentors basically told me that they're like more expensive and like it's worth it in the long run because you you establish yourself as like a more credible company than just like a thrift store or whatever it is. Not to say that you can't be a credible thrift store too, but that just wasn't, I guess, my path. And I took a risk on buying a couple bags back in December of 2024, posted a video about it, and it just like went crazy. And so it just continued to build on itself where it was like, oh, this is, I think in part it was one that the pieces were more expensive. So that makes it easier to hit a revenue number when you're, it's like a $30 shirt versus $300 bag. Those things look a little different when on your revenue numbers. But then also, it was just like once I saw it working, I was much more motivated to be like, I'm just going to be super consistent with this. Like, I'm going to do the drops every single week. And we did do the drops almost every single week for last year. Like, we did not really miss. And it was just getting involved in the pop-ups. I definitely think getting involved in the other people's markets was really like a huge thing too. So I think it was a combination of a lot of things and just like absolute never sleeping type of vibe. Like, so that was the other thing too. So I'm glad I did it, but I'm also like tired, you know?
I'm sure because I believe it, believe me, I know the multi steps of this in this game is like it is not a joke. It's intensity and the just moving things from to and fro and oh no, there's a lot of admin involved. So congratulations on that for sure. And so of course, Nick, brands, entrepreneurs see all of this information that you're dispensing. They see how you are approaching the growth of your business and you are an open book in offering information to this community. If someone wants your paid strategic advice, how do you go about building a brand or help to build a brand in the way that you have built your brand from essentially from scratch, and never mind in such a with such a rapid rise? What are the steps that you take to help these brands essentially launch and become successful?
Yeah, so actually like when I got laid off, I was doing some level of social media consulting for like small to medium sized boutiques in New York City, not necessarily vintage, but so consulting is kind of like I also was like a UX consultant at Google too. So I helped if you spent like a certain amount of money with Google on their ads, then you would get me as like a free consultant and I would help them with their like user experience design on their website. And then I would also help them with like their mobile ad strategy. So I like do have like consulting experience in that sense, and I've just started applying it more to vintage. Um, what I find like a lot of the people are asking me is how to grow online to create a vintage store. And I think a lot of people are very interested in doing a hybrid where it's like they're doing online and then they're also doing pop-ups or markets and things like that. Um, which I think is smart. I usually give them information around like the different ways that you can talk online about what you're building. So for me, I always say like there's six things you can talk about, which is two are products. So one is like your product aesthetics. So it's like if you have like the most insane bag that you source or whatever, like that could go viral on its own just because of like the uniqueness of the product or the beauty of the product. Value is of the product. So like why is a certain piece valuable? Like what's the story behind it? Who designed it? Why is it expensive, etc.? Or like why is it a good deal? Like I think my videos that are like here are all the bags under $700, that's kind of a value video because it's
Mhm.
showing immediately, oh wait, why could I get a designer vintage bag for under $700? And then the other three are more like personal of like you talking to the screen or showing your life. So I would say ecosystem is one where you're talking about like what's going on in the space, like what's going on, where do you live, and then talking about the vintage space in that area. So for me, that's like establishing credibility in New York City, knowing these different vendors, promoting them, whatever. And also knowing about like when the markets and the pop-ups and all those things are because you don't like you want to be that person that people know they know about vintage in New York. And then the other one is like education slash news. So like talking about things that are going on in the fashion world or like educating people on a certain designer or a certain era or whatever it is, like whatever works for your page. And then the last one's behind the scenes. So it's like showing you building your business. And then the sixth one, which I just added recently, but I think it's good, is like showing your customer. Like, can you show customer experience? Can you show your customer shopping at your store? And I think if you think about things in those six ways and just cycle through them, you'll never run out of content. And I think you'll show all aspects of the business and make your page very like savable and shoppable too. So that's like the what I usually recommend.
I mean, you said you were data driven in one arena, but you're also data driven in this create this because this is part of the creative lane as well. But yeah, that's a wonderful formula. So there are different profiles to your post essentially. They're different
Like
themes, not
pillars.
profile
Yeah.
themes.
Yeah, totally. And I think some people get caught up in like, I'm a niche and what do I post in that niche? And a lot of times people post like beautiful photos, but it doesn't somehow connect an audience. And I think sometimes what people are really looking for now is like savable content that they can go back to and learn from, or, you know, or they can remember like a certain event that's coming up or something like that. I think that's how people continue to come back to your page, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It absolutely does. Now let's talk about pricing. In vintage, pricing is let's call it mysterious things. Things are wildly overpriced,
Mhm.
and others will think that the same thing is like super underpriced. What do you make of this pricing sort of matrix in the vintage space? And if do you have a
It is so
formula for
confusing.
your own pricing?
Like, it is so confusing and so crazy because, like, just transparently, I used to get like a Fendi baguette last year in January. Like, if we're talking 1 year ago, maybe 1 year ago today, I could get a Fendi baguette on my end for like $500 to $600, like a Fendi
Yes.
Zucca baguette.
Yeah.
Now I cannot. So it's like, I think a lot of people, a lot of the consumers think that we are raising prices because we just are trying to capitalize off of this like growth in the vintage space, but that's just not the case. We're raising prices because our people that we source from, or the sources in where we get them, or the expectation from our consigners, whatever it is, has grown. So we can't just sell things for what we used to be able to sell them for. So for me, pricing is a lot of like, what do I get the inventory from? And then like, how can I still make a decent margin, but also give the customer what I believe to be a better price than what other people are putting out there? Because for me, I would rather move inventory than sit on something for a long time. However, I'm kind of changing my mind about that because the way that things are increasing so rapidly, I feel I should archive some things because I'm afraid that people are going to hold on to things now and never consign them or give them up because they know the value and as they should. But I'm like, I need to keep some of these things because they're going to be so special in a few years when everything's going so crazy. You know what I mean? Like, how do you think about it? Because I'm like, this is crazy.
Oh, I think that is you make such a good point there, and I feel exactly the same way. It's shocking to me how quickly the prices can increase. It happened with the Paddington. It happened with the what's that with Balenciaga one called
Bags. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. All of a sudden, like literally, they triple in the space of like under 6 months. I
Right.
cannot believe, and I know you source things from Japan. I do as well, all over the
Yeah.
world as we do, and they increase those prices when they see the demand is rising. Yes, of course, there's limited inventory to some of these vintage items, but it's not based on that. It's based on desire and an opportunity. And once they see that something is like trendy, the price of it goes up and it happens really really quickly. That's a market difference than what can happen in traditional retail, of course, as we know, but that's just unique to the space. But and I'm glad I wanted to speak about this because I know that the audience doesn't always understand. They think it's arbitrary. They could go from one booth to the next and have a very different price point for a very similar if not the same item. So it's
Right.
something that needs to be understood from the consumer perspective.
And it's really true though that like maybe you bought the same bag that I have, but you bought it 5 months ago. So you just have a better price on it because it's, you just bought it for a better price, whatever it may be. But isn't so I'm glad you brought up the Chloe Paddington because I've been talking to my employee about this. It's almost like the falls are faster as well, where I didn't used to see that in vintage. So like now the Chloe Paddington, when you look it up now on vintage, like on Poshmark and stuff, people are selling it off again for like it's dropped, like it's gone back
Has
down.
it?
And I'm like, and not as much, but like I'm seeing a decline slowly, and I'm like, this has only been popular for 5 months. You know what I mean? Like it's
Literally, and it went, at least from my vantage, it went from around, let's say, 450 up to 1300 in the space of that period of time, in from what I saw.
100%. I was literally, and I said, I remember I made a video in like July and it had already gone from 400 to 700. And I was like, the Chloe Paddington is going to double in price. And people were like, you're crazy. It's already gone up $300. I was like, I promise you it's going to double in price. And it literally went up to $1,400. I was like, it did. Like,
It's
I,
absolutely fascinating. And there's a whole other conversation. We can't have it in this, in this podcast. But there's a whole other conversation about how young people have rediscovered so much of like fashion history, so much of those products that were, iconic at a time, and
yeah,
what they have transformed it into, how rabid they are about consuming it, and how that is now defining a whole new culture. It's absolutely fascinating, and I'm taking note. While I'm very much a part of it, I'm also taking notes, just like seeing like
yeah,
this is actually happening.
yeah.
It's a new dawn.
It definitely is. I feel like, and I haven't even been in it that long, and I still feel like I'm like, what is going on? Like this is in a good way in some ways, but it forces you to be a lot more like you are required to keep up a little bit more. Like you can't just, I mean, you could just be like, I'm not going to sell the Chloe Paddington, and that's totally fine. But if you want to ride those waves, you kind of have to be keeping your eyes on those like shows and what are being re-released and all that type of stuff too.
Yes, you do. Oh my word! Another one that is going insane in my world is, and I'm not always good at remembering the name of these things, the name of the bags and all the things. But in any case, is that Dior logoed one, the one that was reissued.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, the prices are increasing crazily, and the consumption is off the charts. I cannot keep them in. It's really, really strange. I'm so fascinated by how people are consuming vintage. How they're consuming vintage right now.
Me too. But I think that, it's interesting though, because I think they also see the potential of like, I could have this for a few months and then I could sell this. Like I could sell this myself on Poshmark. And maybe I bought it for $1,400 when it was at its peak, but maybe I sell it for 900 and then it's like, well, I wore the Chloe Paddington for a year and I actually netted it. I only spent $400 on it really at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like,
That's a brilliant that's a brilliant point to note right there, because Nick, I tell my customers, I tell some of my customers, if you ever want to sell it back, bring it back to me. Yes, because that's we're working with circularity. That's exactly what this is about, and and that's a great item. You will tire of it. Bring it back. Let's circulate it some more. So yeah, that's a wonderful point right there. Now on trust, that's another arena in this trust and authenticity. How do you approach that? Do you have any issues surrounding that? Yeah, how do you approach this issue of authenticity?
I mean, I think when I started, I was definitely leaning on the authentication tools like Entropy, Check, etc., to make sure that these pieces were real and to provide people with those authenticity certificates. In this next phase, I feel yes, the authenticity tools are amazing, but I personally would like to become like trained and have a good enough understanding, like really educate myself on how to authenticate bags with
Yes.
my own eyes because I do believe the authenticity tools are pretty much accurate, and they do have that like year warranty. So if I sell it to a customer and the customer were for whatever reason to go and check and find that it wasn't real, then they would pay me back and then I could pay the customer back. So that kind of all works out fine. But I know that there's a few like online trainings of those that I kind of want to know more about too, because I just want to feel really sure as well. And I like having two authenticity tools as well, because then I can double authenticate and really confirm. So that's kind of how I use authenticity and trust. But yeah, like a lot of the trust also comes from like the content I create and like showing that I know what I'm talking about, hopefully.
Exactly. I was about to say that as well. Of course, I'm asked about authenticity all the time, and yes, I get my things authenticated. I get a lot of things from Japan that comes with an intrinsic authentication. But also, we have a reputation, we have a profile. Like, trying to slip through some fantasia bag is not really the profile of a burgeoning entrepreneur. That's not to say that it's not done, but that's not in the arena. People are not trying to pass off inauthentic items as a rule. Okay, we're gonna wrap this up, Nick, but I want to ask you a sort of like a future forecast question. We're seeing chains like, well, not many, but like a Second Street, chain like a Second Street exists. Do you anticipate further chains like this? Do you think, we spoke about the scalability of vintage, and I'm still trying to really kind of get a better sense of that. Is there really that opportunity where we're going to be seeing a lot more chains in vintage is going to be, an important lane for consuming accessories and clothing, as department stores have been historically, as traditional boutiques have been historically. If I was to go by what I see in Japan, for example, where every place, everywhere my eye lands, is a resale and a vintage real estate. Like, that's what I see there. Japan has been totally taken over by vintage. Are we forecasting a scenario like that here? Is it that powerful a movement?
I feel like there are so many good things that you said, and I think about those all the time too. The interesting part about Japan, from what the wholesalers tell me, is most of the people that come in those stores are Americans. So they're building that world for American people, which is
Mhm.
so interesting. So I do think that there's definitely the opportunity to have that exist here. And, I definitely think there's going to be, I mean, if they're not already thinking about it, I'm sure the people in Japan are thinking about coming here and doing some of those chains for sure. But yeah, like I mean, there's definitely that on a small scale. Like the niche shop has a couple stores, so like I feel like people are starting to expand their stores over time. And this is really interesting. I found this out the other day. I guess private equity is starting. You know how private equity like buys everything now?
Yes.
I heard this story about this woman who had three consignment stores in Connecticut, and she sold all of the consignment stores to a private equity firm. Isn't that interesting?
That's very interesting. That
So
is
I was like,
absolutely
private
interesting.
equity is
Yes.
getting into this, and they're gonna try to scale it, which is really kind of annoying in some ways, but also like it's it's
Interesting
what's
in others.
happening. So I feel like it's just like being aware of that, and yeah, how can we like kind of either differentiate ourselves as like we aren't those chains and like we have like true brands and people know us, and hopefully that's our competitive advantage,
Right.
or maybe we lean in other ways where we can just like support the next phase of sellers, or we can, yeah, like create products for vintage sellers even too. So I feel like those are all the things that I'm kind of thinking about. But yeah.
And what about for your business specifically? What are your evolutionary goals in the near to midterm?
I'm really into the pop-ups, like the solo pop-ups. So I think I'm gonna do that for the next year, basically.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you, but you mentioned something on one of your posts that I thought was fascinating. That I think you mentioned on the post from Miami, where you could do a city tours, like city pop-up tours a la Miami.
Yeah.
I thought that was fascinating. Tell
Yeah.
me more.
Yeah, so that's what I really want to focus on this year, is doing like tours in different cities, because we do get a lot of people requesting different places like Boston and Philly and like nearby places, but then also like I'm from Detroit, so like I kind of want to go to Detroit and do it. Like I feel like people there are definitely prime for it, and like we get a ton of Dallas requests, we get a ton of LA. So it's like, why not? We might as well just like bop around and see and bring vintage to people who probably don't get it as often as we do in New York. And I think that will be really fun. And then I don't think I ever want to, I don't want a store front. It's not for me. Yeah.
No, no, no. But I thought you have a showroom in New York.
I, so I had a showroom with things it's thrifted. Sienna still runs that, but I'm not a part of that anymore. I have a showroom, I guess, here. It's really just my office in New Jersey now. And
Oh,
then
okay. Okay, so New Jersey.
um but I might do a collective in like a luxury vintage collective that might open. I don't know if it's like officially opening or not, but like someone, do you know the New York Archive? The girl
I
that,
do, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, she might open a collective. I think it's like she's debating if she wants to do it. So maybe we'll have something there eventually, but me owning my own ground floor store feels like it's just not something that I'm personally that interested in. But I know that people kill it and they get the stores and they're like, I make so much on a weekend. But
Well, we are kind of into like the dopamine selling, the those pop-ups. Oh my God, the reward, that sensation,
yeah.
from a 1 day or 2 day pop-up, it's incredible. And also the money that you can make from these events is tremendous. And so you're thinking about the slog of like staying into a store like, 8 hour days, 5, 7 days a week. Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, I did that in Malibu. I will never do that again.
Oh
So
no, I
I definitely understand that. And you have a formidable business in spite of that. In spite of that. And I also think a lot of your personality is such an important driver for the business that you do as well. That like, yeah, the more that you show up in person, I think the more engagement and the more sales that you'll have because you're absolutely winning at this.
thank you so much. No, I really appreciate it. I feel like that means a lot, honestly, coming from you. So I think it's going to be a fun year, and I can't wait to see like really what happens in the vintage space in general. But yeah, there's so much fun stuff happening.
So much fun stuff happening. Nick, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I know, as I said, you're
Oh,
super busy, so thank you
no,
so much again for taking the time and because yeah, we have to educate. I know as I said, we're on the front lines. We're in this little, ecosystem. We our responsibility. You're doing a great job at it. I'm attempting to do my part is to really educate an audience about what is going on in this truly exciting space of vintage that we're both involved with. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
yeah, thank you. I feel like this is going to be great for people because you obviously ask the right questions because you live it too. So I feel like when I've done interviews in the past, not that they're bad, but they're not vintage sellers as well. So I think it's been like a really nice combo because it's like, no, these are the things that we talk about every day in the vintage space. So we need to, talk about it more too.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I for sure I'm going to be checking in with you because I think what you're doing is tremendous, and I please I need some tips of my own. So thank you.
I need to. So,